South America. Worth noting, former Brazilian President Lula declared victory over current President Bolsonaro. And Lula is a radical leftist, and the election results come as a surprise to most who follow politics there, considering that Bolsonaro presided over some of the best economic growth in the nation's history. So there are a lot of accusations of fraud in that election. It was done all electronically. There was no paper trail. And at this point, it's pretty well known that it looks like this election was just basically fraudulent. So truckers are setting up hundreds of blockades of the highway system across that country, demanding action, waiting for Bolsonaro to speak out and let them know his next move. But as well as we all know too well, once this deal is done, it is very difficult to fix. Mark Moraes is a Brazilian immigration attorney, and he joins us now. Mark, it's great to see you. Mark, what are Brazilians saying about this presidential election, and how do we know how much of it is true? Because, of course, the left is not going to cover this. And, of course, to the degree they do, they'll just probably say it's a conspiracy theory, right?
Yes, Dr. Gina, thanks for having me. It was a shock for a lot of people when they announced that Lula won the election, because you could see on the streets of Brazil every time that Bolsonaro would host a rally, hundreds of thousands of people would go to the streets as opposed to the other candidate. So everybody was in shock that Bolsonaro lost this election.
Yeah, and probably in all likelihood he didn't. But is there any method for counting, for figuring out what happened and actually reversing this? Because we all saw what happened. Sounds very familiar here in the U.S. And nothing has been done about it. And it doesn't sound to me like anything's going to be done about it. What is your prediction? What will happen there?
Yeah, Bolsonaro for many years tried to pass a law in Congress that would allow for a paper receipt of your vote, because everything is done electronically. But of course, the Supreme Court of Brazil and Congress declined that, so he could not pass that. So now pretty much is stuck with the decision because there's no way of auditing that.
I mean, they had to know this out in front of it. It's interesting just to think of, how the people will react, because Bolsonaro, like Trump, held huge rallies. Tens of thousands came. You said hundreds of thousands. It's the same thing here. Joe Biden couldn't get 8 people in a crop circle. But we were stuck with it. You'd think they would have learned something. You'd think someone would have done something beforehand. I guess it's so unbelievable to see this happening again, isn't it?
It is. Bolsonaro was predicting something was going to happen, and he tried to change the law to allow for a paper receipt of the voters, so they could compare the numbers that was cast electronically versus the paper. But unfortunately, he could not do it. Bolsonaro just very recently showed up for a press release in Brazil, and pretty much he didn't concede to the election, but he thanked all the voters, and he stayed for 2 minutes and then left.
And the things I'm hearing about Lula are quite concerning. This isn't just a bad guy. This is a really bad guy. Explain how bad this is. Very
bad. He was convicted for 12 years in federal prison in Brazil. And he spent short of 600 days in prison when the Supreme Court of Brazil said there was a mistake during the criminal procedure. They didn't acquit him, but they said there was a mistake, and he had to be released from jail. And so now he could run for being president, and he won to become the next president of Brazil.
And wasn't he, if I understood correctly, wasn't he in prison on election fraud charges?
He was actually in prison for corruption, for billions of billions of dollars being spent in other countries. For instance, he built a seaport in Cuba using Brazilian taxpayers' money. He built a subway in Caracas, Venezuela, using Brazilian taxpayers' money, where a lot of the big cities in Brazil don't have their subway system of their own. So he was bribing the legislative representatives in Brazil to pass all the laws that he wanted to pass.
And my understanding was, too, that the prison population that Bolsonaro is largely responsible for to try to straighten out the country, am I telling this right, that they were allowed to vote also in this election?
They were allowed to vote. And not only that, once they learned that Lula won the election, they had a video from inside a lot of jails in Brazil. They were all celebrating, all the criminals inside the prison were all cheering, high-fiving each other when they learned that Lula became the president.
Yeah, this is particularly interesting, Mark, because I know Florida just passed that prisoners could vote. Other states allow prisoners to vote. It's very interesting because you just don't know. I mean, I think if somebody is in prison on election charges, especially, they should really not be allowed to vote. But Mark, the working class now not happy that this radical leftist has declared victory. The truckers are blocking the roadways, and from what I understand, they don't have a railway system like we have here in the United States. So when the truckers stop, that means the whole country pretty much comes to a screeching halt, right, Mark?
Correct, Dr. Gina. Yeah, it is a mess in Brazil now. Yesterday, they were even canceling a lot of flights in and out of Brazil because there is no way from, the main roadway that connects the major airport in Brazil, it was blocked. So the key was to stop all flights into Brazil. And you're right. The roads are blocked for at least the main roads in Brazil because the truck drivers are not happy with the results.
And Brazil has gone all electronic with voting, as you mentioned. The voting machines put out some interesting number. There are almost 2 million votes that are blank and almost 4 million votes that are null votes. What do null votes mean?
A no vote is when you press a number for a candidate that doesn't exist. Let's say Bolsonaro number for this election was 22. Lula was 13. And let's say you just decided to put 55 and you press confirm, it's going to invalidate your vote because there's no candidate with that number.
And it's being reported that Bolsonaro is not going to contest the results. Is this what you're hearing? And does this surprise you?
That kind of surprised me. But at the same point, like you were saying before, any attempt to contest elections, you were seen as a dictator, even though it's fraudulent. So Bolsonaro pretty much allow his transition team to pass over to the next president.
And what are your predictions regarding the protests happening there? What will the result of that ultimately be? Because without a railroad, without any other way to get goods, the country is going to be in big trouble fast, right?
Yeah, you can see now in Brazil, the supermarkets, the grocery stores, with huge lines because people are just afraid that they're not going to be able to get their groceries. If the truckers cannot get there, they won't be able to get the food or the water that they need. So people start panicking now in Brazil with the whole situation. And not only that, a lot of professionals, investors, are afraid of what's going to come. I worked with immigration to the United States, high-skilled professionals and investors, and they always start calling us, trying to see a way to come to the United States, of course, legally.
Yeah, so that's going to leave the country in an even worse place, because if everybody leaves and immigrates, even though you're an immigration attorney and that's how you make your living, and I'm sure that, these are going to be really top quality immigrants, as you're saying, business leaders and probably political leaders from the Bolsonaro group faction. But at the same time, it's going to leave just the leftist, criminals and people in a desperate situation there in Brazil. So what do you think the future of Brazil looks like? Was this a death sentence for that country?
I think so, Gina, because see what happened to other countries in Brazil. Prosperous country like Chile is now taken over by the leftist regime. Same thing with Argentina, now with Colombia, not to mention Venezuela. Lula is very aligned with all those leftist governments.
Wow. How sad to just know that it was stolen. It's like feels like we live in a parallel universe, doesn't it, Mark? Like, how can this happen? It's so crazy to me that anybody wants this who has any desire for freedom whatsoever. I'm in disbelief. I'm in disbelief that this happened after it happened here, and that there's just not anything anyone did do beforehand or can do now. But I guess this is where they find themselves. What are your warnings to the United States based on what happened just now in Brazil? What have we learned?
Yeah, we need to be very careful and have ways to monitor those elections, because this is the future of a country. If someone just comes, if a party just comes and takes over an election without being able to audit the results, is very tough.
Well, and know that the left has their pencils sharpened and they are taking notes on how this was done, because as I've always said about our country, since Obama was president, at least, I don't think they care if our whole country is a graveyard as long as they are the undertakers. And it's a terrifying thing. And it's precisely what we have in Brazil. And we better be watching out, because they will be trying all the same tricks. Mark Morais, thank you so much for your expertise on this. We certainly, wish those that need to immigrate, we wish them the best, because, and I appreciate anyone who wants to do that legally. So thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate your wisdom.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Baby, I don't know. My advice is